Good morning. So it worked at 7:30, it just didn't want to work at 8, did it? Thank you, Steve and Gabby. So good morning, I'm Judy Ann. Welcome to Forum. It's so exciting to be back. It's nice to see all of you. To tell you a little story, my husband and I definitely have a subscription to this Colorado Outdoors magazine. And a year and a half ago, this particular edition came out that just has to do with photography of all the wildlife in the state of Colorado. And I was so taken with this. It's an absolutely gorgeous thing. So I called Renzo Del Piccolo at CPW and said, hey, I want to talk about local wildlife and where we can be. And so, if you know Renzo, he's such a nice guy. He immediately hooked me up with Natalie. And I said to Natalie, could you come just talk to us about local wildlife and do that type of thing? So we had it all set up. We were set for March of 2019. So here we are. We'll get trial number 2, right? So thank you for being here this morning. I would like to introduce Natalie Renneker. She is the District Wildlife Manager for Montrose area, and she will tell you everything she wants to tell you about herself. Thanks, Natalie.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Yeah. All right. So yeah, my name is Natalie Renneker. I'm the District Wildlife Manager for Montrose-West. So I cover a little bit of town, and then I go all the way west up onto the Uncompahgre Plateau, basically to the Vide Road. So if any of you have hunted or are hunters, I cover the middle chunk of Unit 62 for the hunting unit. So this is Area 18, just a little bit of background. So 7 wildlife officers are in this area. We all cover country from Telluride north to Delta, and then from Cimarron west to the Utah state line. So 7 of us have a fair bit of country to knock out. And with us, we have a wide range of habitats. We go all the way down to kind of this farm and ag land that we have here close to town, all the way up to the high country. So a lot of different habitat, a lot of different wildlife. So we're going to jump right into that. So these are, I think we'll talk about everything here a little bit and more. So bear, both of these bears are alive. They're just a little sleepy right now. Okay, they're being naughty. So bears, we have a very healthy bear population here in the Montrose area, and they like to get in trouble sometimes, and that's where we can come in. So human-bear conflict is a pretty big deal. So a lot of the times, you know, if we're investigating livestock predation, we're looking for signs of bear. This was the side of a poor old guy's trailer. He had 2 bears that came and visited him, and then this is kind of some of the gear that I use if I have to relocate a bear. So we've got drugs to make him sleepy and feel good, ear tags, all that good stuff. So our area is actually 5th in the state for reported human-bear conflicts, which is kind of surprising as far out of the front range as we are, okay? Out of thousands of calls that the state receives, only about 1.7% of those incidents end in a bear being euthanized. So people think that we go out and we just kill bears left and right. It's not the case, okay? A lot of bear reports are sightings, or we know they're around. The Uray country and Ridgeway country is a good example. We expect people to be a little bit more tolerable of bears up there because they are living in bear country right smack in the middle of it. This was a sow, let's see, this was last year, so it's hard to see. I do not have the photography skills that they do in Colorado Outdoors, so forgive me. But there's the sow, and then she's got one of her cubs is right there, and her other one, I can't even see where her other one is. I think he's right there, there's his little butt. All right, so she came into town last year and was very naughty, so we ended up having to get a hold of her, and then the cubs came down and crawled in the trap with her while she was sleeping, and off they went. That's gonna catch bear cubs because they're mean little boogers. So, mountain lions, okay? We have lots of mountain lions. Mountain lions are harder to estimate populations than bears and other animals are because they're very elusive. If you think your house cat is bad when he doesn't want to be found, try finding a mountain lion. Okay, they just do not like us. So they're pretty cool. They're very solitary animals unless you've got kittens with them. So these are 2 kittens here. Mom's mad at them for some reason. I really don't know why. Kittens, they're cute little stinkers. All right. They've got a lot of spotted pattern to help them blend in when they're young. As they get older, they grow out of those spots. Cat tracks. You know, a lot of times with cats, because of how elusive they are and how large their territories are, we have to look at what they leave behind in terms of clues. A single cat, a mountain lion, can have a home range of a couple hundred square miles. So we've had collared cats that we collared in Salida. It went all the way up in Wyoming and then turned around and came all the way back down. And that's pretty typical for a lion to have that type of home range. So this was a naughty boy. He unfortunately killed some goats. So we had to go and get a hold of him. So we ended up, the best way to deal with cats is to use hounds. They don't like going into traps very well. You know, house cats, they like going into boxes. If you put a box on the floor, you're gonna catch a house cat. Doesn't work as well with mountain lions. They're not too keen on it. So if you look real closely, the hound is right there, and then the cat is right there. So, but yeah, this was the nicest picture I had. To be honest, I don't see lions very often unless it's a hunter harvest, and I try not to show those pictures too much in presentations. I don't know what everyone's opinions are, and I respect that. So, like I said, we rely on clues that they leave behind. So here's some lion tracks. And then right here is actually a drag mark that led to this cache where it had stored a deer that it had munched on. These are scrape marks where it had, just like a cat covering stuff with litter, they'll do the same thing with their food, so you can find those scrape marks sometimes. We did a pretty big study on the Uncompahgre Plateau looking at the effects of sport hunting on lions. So these are some of the photos from that study. That study was done from, 2004 to 2014, I think. So a little bit before I came over here. But you can see they are cute but feisty. But they can get very big. That's a very big tom. It's another tomcat. I thought this was kind of cool. So you can age lions based on their teeth. This one I can tell you was roughly about 10 months old because he's got his adult canine coming in behind his baby tooth. So that's what that is. We do deal with game damage a little bit. So bears love honey. All these circles are actually from bears being in cornfields. They love corn. So sometimes if Olathe Spray is doing their rounds, they'll call a landowner and be like, hey, you got a bear in your corn, because if it looks like crop circles, it's a bear. So that's pretty much it. If they see what looks like crop circles, they call them and say, you either got bears or really, really big raccoons. So that's when they'll call us and we'll come out. And this is what it kind of looks like up close. So bears will just smash it down flat because they are living the good life in cornfields. They've got corn to eat. They get the irrigation water that comes through. They've got cover, so they never have to leave that cornfield. So bears can actually cause quite a bit of damage in our cornfields around here. So they're kind of pesky. So yeah, that's bear damage. That was up at Keith Catlin's place last year. I had a bear that gave me the runaround for about a month and then decided to leave on his own. So we do deal with livestock damage that we have to investigate. I think the next photo is showing kills. I tried to make it as nice as possible, but you have a bear versus a lion. So bears will eat everything. They'll just leave hide and bones, and they don't like hide, so they kind of treat it like a fruit roll-up is the nicest way to put it. They'll just peel it back. So that's a good bear indication. Lions will cover their food up and come back to it. So, lynx. So we've had a very successful lynx reintroduction in Colorado. From 1999 to 2006, we released over 200 Canada lynx into the area. They're mostly released up around the San Luis Valley area in the San Juan Mountains. There were several different steps that we had to be able to check off to say that it was a success. The biggest way to gauge success was if we had naturally reproducing kittens on the landscape, and we did get that. So we have pretty healthy populations. Up in Uray, you can definitely find lynx in that high country above Uray and Telluride. They have pushed to that level. So we monitor them using game cameras. So that's one of our wildlife officers and one of our other officers' kids. They took horses out to put cameras up. We look for tracks and scat, because you can take the scat or their poop and you can genotype it, so you can figure out individuals from the DNA that's left in the poop. So that's kind of a new thing we've been able to do. But we get really cool photos when we have game cameras up. So this one's actually a collared cat. He's got a little radio collar on. This one's probably a lynx with a pair of kittens with them. I love lynx. They've got the biggest, fluffiest feet in the world. So they're pretty cool cats. And they stay high. They don't care about how much snow is up there. Any questions so far? I'll have time at the end for questions, but silence is golden. All right, so elk. We have a lot of elk here. Colorado has the largest elk herd in the contiguous United States. So we went from not having hardly any elk back in the early 1900s to having very strong elk herds. I would say our local elk herd is struggling a little bit. So we're doing some research. So this is a cow elk. She is quite fine. She's got oxygen going to her. She is a little doped up, so she has no idea really what's going on with her. It's like alien abduction for animals. But what we're doing there is we're checking to see if she's pregnant or not. And we also look at how much fat she has in her body. So we can take an ultrasound machine and you can measure that layer of fat on her backside. And this is done usually in about March, or actually February-ish is when we'll capture them. We don't want to get them when they're a little later in the pregnancy, because if you get them a little too stressed later in the pregnancy, a lot of times they'll miscarry or something like that. So we get them when it's pretty early in the pregnancy. I wonder if this will play. Let's see. This is how.
Would you like the lights up?
That would be great, yeah. Let's see if I know how to get this to play. There we go. So that's how we get elk delivered to us. I bet there are a lot of hunters that would love to have elk delivered this way, but because that's the only way they're going to have any luck with some of the poor guys. So that's how we get elk delivered to us. They capture them using nets from the helicopter. So they take a net gun, throw it at them from the helicopter, they bundle them up in that, and then they ship them to us to a staging area, and that's where we work on them. If we determine that the cow is pregnant, she gets a collar fitted with her, and then she gets a transmitter inserted into her body. So it's called a VIT. And then when calving season runs around, which is usually about mid-May, when she has the calf, that pushes that VIT out. And she's waking up. She's a little sleepy. Some handle drugs better than others. She was probably about a 12-year-old cow, so she was having a little bit harder time, but she was pregnant. So, and then calving season rolls around, and we get these cute little sneakers. So when that bit comes out, we get a signal. And it tells us, hey, it's detecting outside temperatures, it's detecting sunlight. So we've got a baby on the ground. So we go out and we find the babies, because they'll stay around the birth site for about a day or so with mom. And we can usually get them collared less than 24 hours after birth. So this is a little bull calf. He's still a little wet behind the ears. He's about 4 hours old. This one was a little bit older, little cow calf. So they get fed with a collar that drops off after a year. Yeah.
So if you touch them, the mom will still come back?
She will, but we're very careful about it. So we will actually take sage and in a Ziploc bag and put the collar in that, so it has more of that smell. We also wear gloves, and our goal is to take the measurements and DNA we want off this calf and be out of there inside of 10 minutes. So we try not to touch the calf as much as possible, and when we do, we wear gloves just to protect against that. Yeah.
You said, I think that the local herd or local population is struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
So that's what this study is going to hopefully tell us. This is a 10-year study, so this is a long-term survival study. So these collars on these calves will tell us when the calf dies, and we can get to it, and we can determine what caused that calf to die. The collars on the cows will also tell us when the cows die, and we can go look at that. So right now we're looking at, is predation an issue? Is habitat an issue? We've even started looking at the size of the calf at birth. If it's a really small calf, those tend to die quicker than the bigger calves do. And then we also look at, I lost my train of thought. Hang on, stand by, it'll come back. We also look at when the calf was born, as far as our calving season this year basically ran from mid-May, and our last calf was captured on July 23rd that hit the ground. So pretty wide calving season this year. Yeah.
Do you have an idea of how hunting licenses will be affected for the next couple of years?
We have discussions about it. I personally would love to see the plateau go to a more limited licenses in terms of archery season. But that's one thing that we do have to look at is what are these data, what is this data going to tell us? You know, are we having calves that are getting born really late and not doing so well, or getting born really early and not doing so well? Is it predation? You know, bears love calves, lions will go for calves, coyotes will kill calves, bobcats will kill calves. You know, is habitat an issue? So we can look at the collar data and see where they're going and spending their year at, because the collars on the cows stay on the cows. We don't have to worry about them growing anymore. So we can look at habitat usage and see is habitat an effect. But right now we have no huge plans in place. We've been instructed to kind of keep things the same. We also have to update our herd management plan, and we always offer public comment for that, for herd management plans, because we try to talk about, you know, this is where we think our elk herds are, and this is what we'd like to see, and then we get the public perspective on, do they think that's a great idea, or do they think we're dumb and don't know what we're talking about? So, does that answer your question a little bit? Perfect. Yes?
Are you concerned about the reintroduction of the wolves in regarding this?
It depends on where wolves will go. I will start this presentation by saying I did not include wolves on this. Part of that is it is so fluid and changing right now that I do not have a lot of good information. What I can tell you for sure is by December 31st of 2023, we will have wolves on the ground. I don't know where, I don't know how many, I don't know anything beyond that. So, but anytime you're introducing a predator, you are going to have an effect on your prey species. That's basic biology. Okay? Yes?
I've read some about wasting disease affecting the elk population. What is it? What causes it? What's been the impact?
So chronic wasting disease is a prion disease, so that affects the central nervous system. In the Montrose area, we have not had positive cases in our elk herds. We do have positive cases in our deer herds. around here. We actually have a lot of hot spots, especially in the valley. So here, just outside and around town in Montrose is one of our hot spots. Olathe is a hot spot. Delta is a hot spot. So it's not curable. There's no known cure for it. But because it affects the central nervous system, it basically causes them to waste away to a skeleton. It affects their cognitive abilities. So when they get towards the end stage of the disease, they can barely walk, they're really unstable, they'll drool, ears droop, they don't know what's going on. I didn't put pictures in there because it's pretty sad to see them that way, but I do have pictures. If anyone at the end wants to see what they look like, I think I have a video of one too, and you'll see that unsteadiness. But I didn't want to throw it in the PowerPoint because it's not fun to see. Yeah.
Well, I have recently read 2 wonderfully entertaining Game Warden memoirs. The first one was A Good Man with a Dog, who worked up in Maine, and a very entertaining one titled Wildlife Wars by Terry Gross, who worked in Northern California. And of course, they describe some of their most vivid experiences, but you get these books, you read these books, and you get the impression that there's an awful lot of poaching going on out there. And I wonder if you could hazard an estimate of what percent poaching is in the taking of elk versus the legal taking of elk during the proper season.
I would be very hesitant to hazard a guess because it depends on what gets reported to us. Because the bad thing about poaching in the woods is there's not a lot of cameras around unless someone's really watching. So it's very hard to gauge. And a lot of the times if hunters or if I'm out and about and I come across an old kill or something like that, it's hard to tell, was this a poaching incident or was this someone had a bad shot on an animal and just lost it. I would say we could probably more easily predict wounding loss from animals during hunting versus poaching. So wounding loss is where, whether it's archery or rifle or muzzleloader, it's where they just make a bad shot and they never recover the animal. And so then, you know, I usually follow some of the hunting forums and you can see all through the hunting season on the hunting forums, someone will find a bull or a cow that's all bloated up and hasn't been touched, and you can see the bullet wounds or the arrow wounds on that, and they'll say, hey, I don't know who was hunting here, but I found your bull. So, but poaching is very hard to gauge. That's where we rely on the public a lot to help us out. I cover over 500 square miles, and I cannot be everywhere at once, and I'm about to cover double that this hunting season because one of our officers is transferring, so I'm going to have basically the whole plateau to run. So that's where we rely on a lot of tips and things like that, but I don't have a good estimate for you on that.
I know it's probably very difficult.
It's
because
very
obviously
difficult.
They don't want to get caught.
I will say like X's are the best source of information for poachers. If you have a bad breakup, oh, they will tell you everything. It's wonderful. They will call.
He says that in that book.
Oh, they're
So
wonderful. I love a bad breakup, to be honest, because you get all kinds of good stuff on them. Yeah.
With the wasting disease in our hotspots, when you have a report of an animal being in bad condition, do you try and take that animal out?
I usually will euthanize the animal. I usually will euthanize an animal if it's to the point where it cannot get up, which when they're calling, when they're that bad, that's usually the case. We do try to remove those really sick individuals. We're also addressing it. We have a valley deer hunt. It's an either sex tag, and it's contained within the valley, basically using the canals as borders. And it's an early season because we're targeting those resident deer that never leave, because those are the deer that are carrying the disease the most. So that we started that last year. We have it again this year, and that's just an attempt to try to push down those valley deer population numbers. Because if you can address that, and especially if you can remove the older mature bucks, they tend to be the highest carriers of the disease, then you can hopefully drive down that prevalence. We try to keep prevalence below 5%. Yeah.
Are they safe to eat?
We've never had any confirmed cases of people getting chronic wasting disease from eating meat, but we usually advise people, if you test your deer and it comes back positive, we usually advise people not to eat it. I definitely know folks that have had CWD positive deer and they ate it. They're like, I paid, $200 for the processing, I'm gonna eat the darn thing. So it's up to the hunter's discretion. Usually we tell people, because it's central nervous system, don't drizzle spinal fluid on your meat or eat the pancreas or eyes or anything like that, because that's part of the central nervous system. I don't know anyone that does that, but you never know. It's a new day and age out there. So this cow was really cool. I can tell you this was a grandma cow. She's probably in her 20s. Because this collar was in the San Luis Valley, and they're like, when I took this photo at the time, they're like, we haven't collared since like the late 80s, and she still had a calf. Elk also get, whether it's cows or bulls, they get what I call a paunch going, which we've all been there. So they get that going, and that's how you can tell it's an older animal if you're out in the field. So, mule deer. This guy has probably beat me up worse than any elk or bear or moose or anything ever has, and he's a yearling buck. I had baseball-sized bruises getting him out of that netting, so I was not too pleased with him. So we monitor deer like we do elk, so we will put collars on does and fawns. This is our circus tent net that we'll put up sometimes to capture them in. Otherwise, we'll try to dart deer, or sometimes if we have extra helicopter hours, we will use the net from the helicopter, just like we do with elk. And usually the helicopter crew has the ability to throw the collar on, pull some DNA for us, and call it a day. So, but we're also looking at, so that's once the net drops on them. So this doe has her collar on. We were wanting to get her fawn collared. So we look at the same things, causes of mortality, habitat usage, things like that. Because I would argue that for both our deer and our elk, herds locally are struggling. Deer herds are struggling statewide, and so we're trying to find solutions for that. We want to continue to provide a hunting opportunity. We want to continue to see deer on the landscape, and we want to be sustainable in doing that. We want to make sure that our grandkids still can see mule deer in the wild or elk in the wild. Bighorn sheep. So, like I said at the end, if people are really curious to see what chronic wasting disease looks like, I've got some photos of some deer, but it's just not nice, so I didn't put it on here. We have two species of bighorns. We've got desert bighorns, which is what these guys are, and we've got Rocky Mountain bighorns. If you go into Escalante Canyon, Delta Country, that's where you'll find desert bighorn. We have a pretty healthy herd there. So all these photos are deserts. I don't have any good rocky photos. But they're pretty cool guys. We are doing a study with these guys, looking at the effects of recreation on bighorn sheep movements, because they tend to be pretty flighty. So it's really curious to see if hiking, biking, hunting, ATV, UTV usage, what that type of usage has, if that has an effect on how these animals move and use their habitat. So if you're ever driving up through Uniweep or anything like that, you might see some of these ewes will have some collars on them. We don't put them on the rams because when they rut, their necks swell and we'll kill them basically, because when the hormones hit, their necks swell up. That's why you usually don't see collars on male animals in the deer world. Moose, I don't have a lot to say about moose other than they terrify me. I will take a bear or a lion any day of the week, but I do not like moose. They just have bad attitudes. So, and cows are the worst. But we do have moose in Cimarron country. I don't have any on the plateau. We just don't have a habitat up there for them. And then on Gray Mesa, we do have moose as well. So they're the largest of the deer family. They are pretty good at aquatic habitats. I've seen moose, snorkel down to get the good plants at the bottom of ponds and stuff. So they're pretty cool little critters. But if you ever see this, it's time to slowly leave. But yeah, this is why they terrify me. That's a moose, and this is up in Alaska, but that's a moose going after a brown bear. So yeah, like I said, I'll take a predator any day. I just don't ask me to go deal with the moose. So we're gonna switch to kind of our smaller stuff. So my first district was actually out in Kim, Colorado. If you don't know where that is, just look for Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Kansas, and that's where I was. So this is a little lesser prairie chicken. So these guys are pretty cool. They're pretty similar to your sage grouse, but they're just a chicken. And they do a cool little dance. This is a male. He's got these feathers right here that he can actually stand up on either side of his neck while he's dancing to impress the ladies. So that's a female, and she's actually fitted with a little radio transmitter backpack. It's literally, they just put it on them like a backpack, they carry that around, we know where they go, so we can try to figure out where some of their leks are, which are their breeding grounds. I love the quail around here, they're so much fun. We've been doing dove trapping recently, and we tend to catch the quail with them. So they just got the cutest little top hats, and that's just a little chick. So pretty fun little sport bird if you're into sport bird hunting. So mourning dove, we do a banding program every year. So we put a little band on them, and our goal is to band 200 birds a year. And that helps because this is a federal migratory species. We can look at where they go. Hunters that shoot banded birds can report that band number, and so we can find out where they were banded, when they were banded, and where they were killed. So we band these guys on the Escalante State Wildlife Area. I was banding last night. And I know last year one of our banded birds was actually harvested in Mexico. So it made it from here all the way to Mexico and was harvested, which is pretty cool. So with doves, you can actually tell a lot. So this dove has that fringe on the edge of all its feathers. So that tells me this is a hatch year dove. So it was born this year. So this is a pretty young dove. We also look at what molt stage it's at. So we count these flight feathers here, and that new baby feather is what we look for, and that tells us what molt stage it's at. Versus this is an adult, this is a male. He's got that real pretty buff top. They have a rosy chest, so this is a male here. He's got that kind of rosy color to his chest, that cheek patch, and a dark color on his head. But he doesn't have the fringe on his feather, so he's an older bird, but there's his molt feather right there. Sometimes I get called to rescue ducklings. I don't know why people pick them up, but they do. And they bring them to us. So with these two little stinkers, that one, I'm not sure if that one did well or not. He was pretty weak when I got him. But this little stinker, I found a duck in River Bottom Park that seemed interested in him, so I just kind of adopted him out to her, and I guess she did well. So she took it and kind of hung on to the little guy. So she was the only one interested. I tried giving it to one of those feral gooses that are out there, but that was a no-go. So, does anyone know what that bird is? It's not a heron.
That's a crane of some sort.
That is called an American bittern. So it's not a great blue heron, it's a small heron. They're body is about like this. He was very upset with me, very offended that I would catch him. So there were people doing a roofing project, and I caught him, and I think they were very entertained at this bird trying to gouge my eyes out while I was trying to catch it. But that's why my hand is on his beak, because he kept trying to stab people, and it's just rude. So he was not very happy with me. But yeah, that was a kind of cool bird. I had to get out the bird book to look him up, because I was like, I don't know what I just caught, but there we go.
Was that here or somewhere?
That was here. So yeah, we do have American bitterns here. They do like to hang out around canals a lot, is where I've seen them now that I know what they are. But they're a water bird. Like I said, they are a smaller heron. So they're much smaller than the great blue herons. So pheasant, they're pretty cool. We don't have a lot of wild pheasant around here. I think anytime if you see a pheasant, it probably escaped from Black Canyon, the shooting club there, because they raise pheasants, and that's kind of a sport club there. So we don't have a ton of wild pheasants, but we do, to get youth interested in hunting, because hunting is what funds a lot of conservation around the state. We do sometimes do youth pheasant hunts, so we'll get these birds from Black Canyon, and we teach the kids how to be safe with guns, teach them how to use shotguns, and then we do a little staged pheasant hunt for them, and they have a good time with it. And we hope that generates some interest in hunting so that we can continue that as we go along. I gotta throw my reptiles in because I love them. That's a little horny-toed lizard, and this is a snake called a long-nosed snake. So they're really pretty. They're not super common.
Where'd you get that snake at?
Okay, that was from when I was out east, on the eastern plains I found him. So not from around here. No, usually around here you're gonna see bull snakes, garter snakes, very rarely a rattler. You guys don't have a ton of rattlesnakes around here. But that little guy was from my old area. You will see a lot of horny toads. There's collared lizards up in the Delta country, so they're pretty cool. Everyone knows what these are. So this was the best photo I could get as a college student looking at sage grouse leks. So those are two males. The leks is where they do their dance. Those are their little air sacs that make that super weird noise when they force air through them, and it makes like a, I can't even mimic it, it's just a really strange sound. But those guys, we do have active grouse leks around here. So we do have to take that into consideration if we have folks that are wanting to do trails projects or things like that. We have certain timing restrictions for them. And they are a listed species, so we do have a little bit of more say with those guys. Bats. I love bats. I was a cave guide once upon a time. I had a lot of fun with it. This is a fringe myotis, so they just got the great big old ears. So we do have some bat researchers. We are monitoring to make sure we don't get white nose syndrome showing up in the state. It affects a lot of the eastern states. It's gotten as far as Oklahoma, as far as we've been able to tell. We've not had it show up here. But white nose syndrome is a fungal infection that'll affect them. It'll affect their wings and grow around their face. It disrupts their hibernation cycle, so they'll wake up too early, and then they don't have the fat reserves to survive. So it's about 90% fatal if it gets into a bat population. Oh, skunks. I love skunks. So this was fun. So he got his head stuck in a mayonnaise jar in town. And animal control shockingly could not find him. I was like, I feel like he didn't look hard enough. I feel like this is a trap. So I ended up finding him and very carefully got the mayo jar off. Best way to, I don't recommend it, just I guess call us. But if you want to do it on your own, the best way is you throw a towel over the danger zone, and then you kind of grab them and pull the lid, pull whatever's on its head off as fast as you can, and then just like run for your life. That's all I did. So I just ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran as fast as I could have ran away from him because that was probably like a 20-pound skunk right there. He He was a big guy. So yeah, he was big. But yeah, we do have skunks here. We mostly will see these striped guys. Spotted skunks are around, they're a lot less common, they're harder to see. Yeah, so spotted skunks are really cool. They're much smaller, they don't get as big as these guys do. And their defense, so these guys, if they're mad at you, they'll raise their tail and stomp their feet at you. Spotted skunks, if they're mad at you, will do a handstand. So they'll do a handstand so you can see the spots all on their body. And that's their way of telling you you're about to get sprayed. So please leave me alone. So they're pretty cool, but I don't have any cool spotted skunk photos. We do have ravens around and crows. So the way you can kind of tell a raven apart, they have thicker beaks. They also have kind of fringy feathers around the beaks. Crows are a lot more smooth around the face. They don't have those feathers that kind of stick out. The tail can also be a good indication. So I always get this backwards. Raven tails are wedged and crow tails are fanned. They look more like a fan. So these can also be very grumpy birds. Any corvid, like blue jays, crows, magpies, just tend to have bad attitudes as well. Because they're too smart for their own good. And then fisheries. We do a lot of fisheries work around here. We recently transplanted a bunch of bass and bluegill and sunfish up to Schweitzer Lake State Park to kind of have a better fishery there. So this actually came from, oh shoot, why am I drawing a blank? The pond up in Delta, Confluence. Goodness gracious. So that was a really nice bass that came out of Confluence. That was a nice female. We didn't want to take her out of Confluence, so we put her back. But she was a big girl. So these, we just sampled where we've done all the river work at Colorado Outdoors. So that stretch of river where we've been doing river work, or not us, but the company that was hired to do it, they're basically restoring the river back to its historic flow. That helps cut down on erosion. It gets a more natural stream flow, and it creates better fish habitat because you get back channels, and back channels tend to act as nurseries for small fish because the water current's not as strong, so they can just kind of hang out there and grow up. So we did this sampling right after they had done that first stage of river work, and you can see we were already finding a ton of fish that had moved back into that area. So during construction, yes, they're going to leave, but it didn't take very long for them to come back, and it should be a pretty good fishable stream area in Montrose, in the town of Montrose, which is pretty cool. That's a gorgeous brown. So he was pretty cool, and sucker, but we don't care about suckers. Garbage fish, good fish. So we also, here in Black Canyon, we have a rainbow trout fishery there that is very resistant to whirling disease. And so when our hatcheries need rainbow trout eggs, a lot of the times our area is one of the areas that will spawn for them. Just because they're that cross between the Hofer and, I'm having a real hard time. There's a cross between two different types of rainbow species, subspecies, that creates a very whirling disease resistant trout. And so that's what we have here in Black Canyon. So we go down there and we'll spawn in the springtime. These are spring spawners. So when they really color up like that, that's how you know they're ready to spawn. That's a little bitty rainbow. And then when we spawn, we basically just collect the eggs, mix it with some milt, and then we send it off to the hatcheries for them to grow. So you got to be careful when you're catching them, because sometimes if they're really ripe is the best word, which sounds awful, but when they're really ripe, if you barely touch their belly, they'll just start dropping eggs like crazy. So it's pretty cool to help with that. And I think that's all. My turn. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Back to the mourning dove.
Yeah.
Let's go back to using the mic.
Oh, okay.
Some of your voices don't do as well as others, and mine's one of those that
And I have a
doesn't.
very low voice anyway.
Yes. Dennis, you're narrow like a couple.
But on mourning dove question, my casual observation is that the Eurasian collared dove is displacing the mourning dove. I'm seeing a lot less mourning dove and a lot more collared. Is there any data that gives us a hint on that?
Yes. I mean, our answer is when we're doing the dove trapping, if we capture Eurasians in the dove trap, they do not leave the trap, is the nice way of putting it, because they are an invasive species. We've even put into place with wildlife rehabbers, they have instructions that if you receive a Eurasian or like an English sparrow or something like that, you're not allowed to rehab that. You just need to humanely euthanize it. And that's because, yes, they do outcompete with our native birds. So in town, you definitely see a lot more Eurasians. I think they're really adaptable to urban environments. And so, yeah, in town, you can definitely see a lot more Eurasians. In the wintertime, I know I have probably 4 or 5 that basically live in my backyard in the winter. So, yeah, you will see displacement from Eurasians. That's why we really don't have a bag limit on Eurasians. It doesn't apply towards your bag limit when you're hunting them. That is because we want people to take those out and not have them, and they're delicious. So it's just a bigger jalapeno popper is what that is. So
what effect does the recent surge in visitors to our public lands have on wildlife and wildlife habitat?
We definitely have some concerns in regard to that. Last year, definitely a lot more people up on the plateau, and they weren't just out hunting or fishing, they were just out and about. Which on the one hand, you know, I love seeing people getting out in the outdoors, especially getting kids in the outdoors. But it is a concern, especially with us, we definitely focus on trying to find that balance between getting people outside or having new trails for people to explore, but we have to balance that with our wildlife needs. A lot of trails or places where people want to put trails tends to be like our winter range for big game, and that's really concerning. There have been recent studies done that show that deer and elk will have the same flight response to a dog walker as they will to a person on an ATV. So people that think, well, I only hike or I only walk my dog, and it's like that still has an impact on our wildlife, especially during those really hard winter months. So it's concerning because the more people on the landscape, they're asking for more trails, or they want trails specific to the type of recreation they're doing, is what we're seeing a lot. Is, you know, the hikers want their own trail, the mountain bikers want their own trail, the horse riders want their own trail, and if we do that, we're not going to have much habitat left. So it's definitely concerning, but I've not seen any huge changes yet with that. So I think a bigger issue is like transient. We saw a lot more transients staying up there this past year, which is interesting. So, and that's more of the poor BLM ranger's problem than mine, but I'm definitely there to help him out when he has a difficult camp. So.
There was a story a few weeks ago, Montrose Sheriff Deputy and a state patrol officer, I think you know where I'm going with this, about a wallaby that got out.
The wallaby escapade.
Yeah, so could you, I don't know if you know anything about exotic animals. I'm just blown away by the fact of what you can and can't own in the state of Colorado.
So Colorado is definitely much more restrictive than other states. So I grew up in Indiana.
Okay.
In Indiana, you can basically own just about anything. Like, we had a black panther escape when I was a kid. So all these farmers were freaking out because someone's black panther got out, was running around southern Indiana for like a month. And they don't even have bears over there. So like, people were freaking out at having something like that around. But in Colorado, with most native wildlife species, you cannot own as pets. So you can't have a pet skunk, you can't have a pet crow or raven or deer or fox or anything like that. They don't make good pets, okay? These are wild animals. Wallabies are really weird. So we do have a list of regulated versus unregulated wildlife in our statutes. Wallabies are unregulated, so you do not have to have any kind of permit. And the reasoning behind that is if a wallaby escaped and ran around South River Road for a winter, it was not going to be able to reproduce. It was not going to really be out competing other animals, and it would most likely die out there. So it's not a serious impact to native wildlife. There's also not a lot of diseases that a marsupial from Australia is going to share with native Colorado wildlife. So yes, that I'm pretty sure there's a person up in Cedar Ridge that sells wallabies. So if you really want a wallaby, they're like $40 up in Cedar Ridge.
Heck yeah.
So I think I'm going to get me like a little ride-along wallaby to go on patrol with. I don't know, man. But a lot of the other stuff that might have impacts, like mouflon sheep, exotic sheep species that you see on like game farms in Texas, we do not allow. Our bighorn sheep are really sensitive to disease. I always tell people, if you look at a bighorn sheep wrong, it's going to die on you. They're just really, really sensitive. And so if you get nose-to-nose contact with domestic and wild sheep that you can get, you can wipe out a whole sheep herd. So it depends on what effect it'll have on habitat and on wildlife. So another example would be feral hogs. We do not want feral hogs in Colorado at all because they're horrible for that.
They have that problem in Texas, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've had them come in before. So in my old district, right there where it bordered like Oklahoma and stuff, you get hogs come in. But Wildlife Services, for lack of better words, they air gun them with helicopters because we don't want them there. So they're just really terrible on the landscape.
There's been quite a bit of national news lately about goldfish that are being released.
Yeah.
And the problems that's causing. Is that an issue in Colorado?
Not specifically. I know we've had one of our reservoirs, I think, had a horrible goldfish problem, and then the pelicans came in for the winter, and problem solved. So pelicans love goldfish, I guess. But we do have aquatic nuisance species that we're concerned with, more with zebra and quagga mussels, because they can disrupt a food chain balance to where you're missing an entire link of the food chain, and it'll cause fisheries to just collapse. So that we focus on. I think up in Ridgeway or Uray, we did get a report someone's koi pond was somehow overflowing and koi were escaping into the river. I think we got that taken care of. I think someone was up there, we were like, grab a net and chuck them on shore or something, because I'm like an hour away, so. But yeah, I've not heard of any other huge goldfish issues.
I wanted to ask you about transfer between elk and deer and domestic livestock. Particularly brucellosis was a concern in this area a few years ago. What kind of situation do we face with that now?
I don't see it a lot. It was either last year or the year before, I was having some deer that were showing up with scours, and they were showing up with a type of viral disease that can be transmitted to cattle. A lot of those diseases are really reliant on nose-to-nose transmission, is how that is usually passed. Or if they're so that could be them actually touching noses, if they share the same water source. I have not had any calls from landowners that have had cows all of a sudden get sick, and we've not been able to trace anything to wildlife. Our biggest concerns with livestock to wildlife transmission is with domestic sheep and wild sheep, because they do tend when they put them on their summer ranges are usually in bighorn sheep habitat. So it's trying to find a solution with our wool growers on how we can address that to where we're not having constant risk of interaction between our wild and domestic sheep. But like I said, last year we had some deer that had a viral disease that cows can pick up, but I think most farmers and ranchers around here vaccinate against it. And that's the big thing, is they can vaccinate their cows, I'll say fairly easily, or more easily than we can with wild deer. And we had some elk that had some type of meningitis, basically is the way to describe it. And that one was just, they were just really weird, and ended up euthanizing them because they were not in a good place. So.
Okay, one last question, and then over the time limit.
How will the drawdown on the Blue Mesa Reservoir affect the fisheries?
There's not going to be as much water, obviously. I think we do have agreements in place to where they only draw down to a certain level. They have to leave a certain level behind for the fishery. But there has not been any discussion that I know of in terms of doing like a public salvage or anything like that. So it's not to that level of a drawdown. And a public salvage is if we know that the fishery is essentially going to fail, we lift bag and possession limits on fish for that reservoir. But I'm not as familiar with Blue Mesa simply because the Gunnison area covers that. So I don't have a ton of information other than what I've seen in the news. But I don't see them completely draining that reservoir and wiping out that fishery. There might be a little bit of fish kill after the winter. We'll just have to see what happens there.
Okay, so Kathy begged, and because Kathy has been here forever, we're going to let Kathy ask a question.
You mentioned that we don't see pheasants anymore. We have dry land wheat fields, and we bought 100 birds from Pheasants Forever, and they just disappeared. What happened to the pheasants?
Farm-raised pheasants are not very smart. So farm-raised pheasants just don't have that, they were raised in pens, they were fed and provided with food and water and things like that, and they don't have awareness for predators, is usually what happens. Around here, I've had quite a few people that have come up to me and they said, we used to have great pheasant hunting in Delta area and that sort of thing, and it's just not there. And I think what happened was the agriculture shifted. So we don't have the agriculture crops that we did when the pheasant hunting was really good. Because they used to have a lot of wheat and stuff for cores and everything like that, and that's what those birds really like. And now we do sweet corn and field corn and orchards and things like that, and that's just not the type of habitat that really supports those birds. Sometimes, if people are really bent on having pheasants, I just tell them, if you have a circle of irrigated hay or whatever, or if you have wheat, let the corners grow with native stuff. And sometimes when I was out east, we used to have great pheasants out there too. And out east's issue was the blizzard from 2007. Wiped out the pheasant there, and it wiped out the scaled quail there because they had 8-10 foot snowdrifts out there. Those birds just couldn't survive it. But out here, I think it's more an issue of because the agriculture trends have shifted to sweet corn and field corn more than anything. It's not great habitat for those birds. So.
Well, Natalie, this has been very knowledgeable and very entertaining. I love your humor.